Yes, I was entertained. As entertained as I wanted to be? Almost? Ridley Scott and his spectacle is truly something epic and breathtaking. Fun and cool, yet brutal action. War is bad. But also, like, medieval fighting can be pretty cool. The duality of man. Or whatever. Maybe not as raw and authentic as original recipe Gladiator, but man does the new incredible CGI animals add a fun new wrinkle into the pure chaos and mayhem of the Colosseum Gladiator battles. The action and the fighting and all of the Colosseum stuff, any wide shots, any creatures or boats or water, just flawless, incredible. I think with a lesser director, it would have felt a lot more cynical and ironically cheap that this sequel is just like, it's a sequel, so bigger is better, right? But I feel like all the best parts of this film are the fact of how big it goes. This film is absolutely worth seeing in the cinema just for the awe and terrible wonder of the Colosseum action. What lets this film down is all the other stuff. Plot is kinda meh and essentially just the Gladiator awakens. Remove the victory of the first film, rinse and repeat the plot, add some new extra elements that are really, really good, but essentially tell the same lead character story with a lesser lead giving you kind of nothing. Have you seen Gladiator 1? Imagine that movie, but not as good. That's this movie. It's a legacy sequel. What did you expect? This isn't gonna be Blade Runner 2049 or Top Gun Maverick or a third example of a sequel that's superior in every single way to the classic original film. No, we all knew this was going to be insert a bad legacy sequel at the very best. And I honestly think it's somewhere kind of in the middle. Definitely not as pointless and derivative as I thought it might be. But then at the same time, is it pointless and derivative? Kinda. But does that matter when I was, dare I say it, entertained? Almost all the actors are doing a fantastic job. I'll get to the highlights of that in a bit. But man, did the emotion just not land for me, like, at all. Like, I just didn't feel like my heartstrings were being pulled effectively or really at all. I think the biggest point of difference, and not to compare them, but also they remade the movie, so I'm going to compare them, is in original Gladiator, Russell Crowe's character never actually spends any time or dialogue or scenes with his wife. And like, spoilers, minor spoilers for the first 20 minutes of both movies, his wife dies, and that's like the emotional journey. His revenge story is like based around his emotional connection to his wife and his family. And man, do you feel that? And it's essentially just a scene where he talks about his farm at home and how much he can't wait to get home. And so much emotional like richness in that one scene. And they never even spend some time together. In this movie, they have a whole scene or two at the start of the movie together before his wife is murdered and he does a big revenge and, does a big Gladiator. And man, I've never felt less for two like characters, especially when you know what's going to happen to her. You're like, all right, okay, play with my emotions, set me up for drama and tragedy and to feel sad. Instead, I'm just like, but despite that, any stadium filled with a bunch of fans, in brackets, maniacs, screaming and cheering and booing as people chop each other's heads off, I'm all for that. Every time we're in the Colosseum and two people are like fighting each other and everyone's just screaming like absolute madmen, all I think is, yeah, I get that. That's me on game day watching footy. What a vibe. Any film that has a Colosseum or Gladiator situation in it, I absolutely love, even if they're always a lesser version of original recipe Gladiator. Star Wars, Marvel, a third to 2,500,000 examples of properties I love doing a Gladiator. And now Gladiator 2, we're doing Gladiator again, is also that, where I'm like, man, it's definitely not as good as Gladiator 1, but I just love a big Colosseum where people are screaming. Chaos inside a Colosseum as people cheer, just exciting. Honestly, anything with a big stadium that reminds me of the Lions winning the grand final at the MCG is in a lot of ways just a perfect film, just for reminding me of that perfect moment in my life. That being said, this is not a perfect film because of all the other things in the film. I do love how Joaquin Phoenix in Gladiator inspired Joffrey, and now Joffrey has inspired the new Legacy sequel versions of Joaquin Phoenix. It's a beautiful circle of life, or circle of cinema. Or is it just Tarantino-flavored plagiarism? Regardless, I love it. It's like old It, Stranger Things to new It situation all over again. It's fun stuff. Speaking of those two freakish little Joaquin Phoenix boys doing a Joffrey impression, I absolutely loved that they were like, okay, it's Gladiator 2. Gladiators. What do we do? 2 gladiators? No, that's too obvious. 2 Joaquin Phoenixes? And then they just went, yeah, because it's Gladiator 2, let's do 2 of them. But it doesn't feel like that in a bad way. It kind of feels like that in a really fun way. And despite kind of every single character in this movie feeling like maybe 2 or 3 more scenes were needed, somehow, even though this movie is super long, I just really, really enjoyed the 2 Joaquin Phoenix agains and their weird incestuous potentially, or something gross and weird's going on, but I really, really liked them. Eddie from Stranger Things Season 4 is like the most likable, charming, just nice-looking guy I've ever seen. And in this, he's the most disgusting, sickly little freak boy I've ever seen. I hated him. I hated him so much. Just looking at his face, I'm like, ugh! He's just a disgusting, horrible man. Paul Mescal is a good actor, but he's no Rusty. Russell Crowe needs no other reason or excuse for us to be calling him one of the greatest actors of all time. If you watch Gladiator then Gladiator 2, which I did essentially back to back, the biggest difference and the biggest issue with this film is our lead Gladsman. Rusty brings an anger and a pain and a fury that Mescal doesn't even attempt. But they sure do love to have dialogue in the movie saying just how vengeful and furious he is, despite all of his acting implying nothing of the sort. Denzel is, unsurprisingly, the absolute highlight of the film. I feel like he is easily the best character. It has the most surprising plot twists and turns. Everything with him in the back half of the film is fantastic. At first I was like, oh, people kept saying he's like so incredible in this. He's fine, like he's always charming and interesting, but then by the back end I'm like, oh no, I really like where this is turning, how this character's shaping up. I do think, and I kind of feel like this for everyone, but particularly him, I feel like there's maybe 1 or 2 scenes we really needed to really strengthen and add to his character, to his arc. As the only man in the entire world who is getting a little bit sick of Pedro Pascal, I don't know what it is. He's always great in everything. I just think that Fantastic Four casting is like, that's thrown me for a loop. I just don't see it. I can't visualize it. I just don't understand why they've cast him. It just feels like because he's the It guy. Not the guy from It, but just the guy, you know, because he's in all the things. And I feel like, yeah, so I just, every time I see him now, I'm just a bit like, okay, I just getting a little bit oversaturated with my Oberon Martell. That being said, he is so incredible in this movie, just so good, probably the second best character, really interesting and unique. Like everything, probably needed 1 or 2 more scenes here or there to really strengthen his arc, but yeah, very, very good. In conclusion, there is a monkey political scene in this film, and it might be simply the greatest thing I've ever seen. Hilarious, weird, and mostly weird. It's a metaphor, or whatever.